When he heard the nanny playing the piano, the millionaire froze as he listened to the music. The same one his daughter used to play before she disappeared 18 years ago. Thomas Callahan stood at the window of his third-floor office, overlooking the sprawling grounds of his estate. 18 years as one of America's most powerful real estate moguls had given him everything money could buy. Yet as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, all he felt was emptiness. His gaze drifted to the stone fountain with its weathered angels, their faces eroded by time and elements. That fountain, that damned fountain where Victoria had played hours before she vanished. Mr. Callahan. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The contractors for the Chicago development are online too. Thomas blinked away the memory. Tell them I'll call back tomorrow. Business could wait. Today was December 7th, 18 years to the day since his 8-year-old daughter disappeared during the annual Callahan Foundation charity gala. 18 years of searching, hoping, and finally, a resignation that hollowed him from the inside out. He loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it in the crystal tumbler, remembering how different life had been before that night. Before his little girl with golden curls and precocious talent at the piano had vanished between guests. Her blue dress, the last thing he'd seen as she skipped toward the gardens. The investigation had consumed 3 years of his life. Private investigators, rewards, media appearances, all leading nowhere. His marriage to Grace crumbled under accusations neither could take back. It was your party, she'd screamed during their last fight. Your guests, your responsibility. You were her mother, he'd countered. Where were you when she disappeared? The divorce had been ugly, the settlement generous. Grace moved to Boston, remarried, divorced again. They hadn't spoken in a decade. The knock at his office door was soft but insistent. Thomas didn't need to turn around to know it was Olivia. You're brooding again? His second wife glided into the room, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor. At 32, Olivia Bennett Callahan was everything his social circle expected of a billionaire's wife. Beautiful, polished, and completely focused on appearances. I have a charity board meeting in an hour, she continued, not waiting for his response. The nanny says Noah has been asking for you all day. Thomas turned, guilt tightening his chest. His 5-year-old twins, the children he'd had with Olivia in a desperate attempt to rebuild some semblance of family, deserved better than a father perpetually lost in the past. I'll go see them now, he said. Olivia adjusted her diamond earring. The Martinez Gala is next Saturday. The governor will be there. Wear the Armani. It wasn't a request. Nothing with Olivia ever was. Thomas nodded absently, already heading downstairs. 7 years of marriage had taught him that his wife's world revolved around status. The Callahan name, the jewelry, the connections to politicians and celebrities. The twins were necessary accessories, cared for by a revolving door of nannies while Olivia maintained her impeccable image. As he approached the children's wing, he heard Noah's laughter, a rare sound that momentarily lightened the weight in his chest. Thomas paused at the doorway, watching his son and daughter splashing in their bathroom. Their current nanny, a college student whose name he couldn't remember, was scrolling through her phone, barely glancing at the water spilling over the tub's edge. Daddy, Emma spotted him first, her wet hands reaching out. Noah's face lit up, though his excited greeting came with the slight stutter that emerged whenever he was emotional. Daddy, look at our B-boat, Thomas smiled, kneeling to admire the plastic tugboat before looking up at the nanny. Her eyes widened as she quickly pocketed her phone. Mr. Callahan, I didn't realize... You're fired, he said quietly, not wanting to upset the children. Pack your things, Mrs. Collins will settle your final payment. 20 minutes later, after drying and dressing the twins himself, Thomas carried them downstairs for dinner, something he hadn't done in weeks. Mrs. Collins, the elderly housekeeper who'd been with the family since before Victoria was born, gave him an approving nod as she set out their plates. The children miss you, sir, she said simply. Thomas nodded, a familiar guilt washing over him. He'd been an attentive father to Victoria, but the twins had received only fragments of his attention, the remains of a heart he'd buried along with the hope of finding his daughter. Later that night, as the household settled into silence, Thomas found himself walking the empty corridors of the mansion, Each step echoed against marble floors and high ceilings. It wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum of memories, every corner haunted by what had been lost. His wandering led him to the music room. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating the white grand piano in the center, still covered with the velvet cloth that had hidden it for 18 years. It remained untouched since Victoria's disappearance. No one had been allowed to play it. Not the twins, not Olivia, not the numerous guests who had passed through these rooms. Thomas stood frozen, recalling his daughter's small fingers dancing over the keys, creating melodies that belied her young age. Victoria's special piece, Stars in the Garden, had been her own composition, a haunting tune she'd played the morning she disappeared. A sudden splash and scream from outside shattered the silence. Thomas ran toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs. The French doors to the patio were open, and the security lights around the pool had activated. Through the glass, he saw Noah thrashing in the water, his small arms flailing helplessly. Without hesitation, Thomas sprinted across the patio and dove into the pool, clothes and all. He reached his son in seconds, pulling the sputtering, terrified child to the surface and carrying him to the pool's edge. "It's okay, buddy. I've got you," Thomas repeated, checking Noah for injuries while wrapping him in a towel that had been left by the loungers. I wanted to see the stars in the W water," Noah hiccuped between sobs. The new lady wasn't watching. Thomas looked up to see a young woman frozen in the doorway, her face pale with horror. "I just went to get his stuffed animal," she stammered. "He was right behind me, and then, you're fired too." Thomas cut her off, his voice cold with fury. "Get out of my house." That night, after settling a traumatized Noah back to sleep, Thomas called Olivia in her separate bedroom suite. "We need a new nanny," he said without preamble. "Someone competent, someone who actually cares about our children." Olivia's sigh crackled through the phone. "I'll call the agency tomorrow. No more college students. No more socialites' recommendations. I want someone with real experience and references." "Fine," Olivia conceded, clearly eager to end the conversation. "I'll handle it." 3 days later, on a sunny March morning, Madison Hale arrived for her interview. At 26, she had modest but solid credentials: a technical degree in early childhood education, experience with foster children, and references from previous families. But it was something else that made Thomas pause as she sat across from him in his study. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her honey-colored eyes conveying a serene maturity beyond her years. There was a contained melancholy about her that seemed oddly familiar. "Tell me about your family," Thomas asked, deviating from his prepared questions. Madison's gentle voice carried no resentment as she explained. "I grew up in the foster system. A wonderful couple took me in when I was 8, but they passed away 10 years ago. Since then, I've worked with children. It's my way of giving back the love I received." Thomas hired her immediately, ignoring Olivia's subtle objections later that evening. "She seems very ordinary," his wife commented with disdain after reviewing Madison's paperwork. But Thomas had seen something in Madison Hale, a quiet strength, a depth of understanding that came from loss. Something told him she was exactly what his family needed. What he couldn't know was that Madison had her own reasons for seeking employment at the Callahan mansion. 6 months earlier, while working for another family in Chicago, she had seen a TV report on famous cold cases. Among them was Victoria Callahan's disappearance. When the image of the Callahan mansion appeared on screen, Madison had experienced an overwhelming dizziness. She knew that place. The white columns, the jasmine garden, the stone angels. Not rationally, but viscerally, from recurring dreams that had haunted her since childhood. For years, Madison had attributed these images to the fantasies of a traumatized mind. She remembered nothing of her first 8 years, only disconnected flashes, large hands cradling her, the scent of jasmine, piano notes echoing. Doctors called it dissociative amnesia, common in children who suffered severe trauma. After seeing the report, Madison had spent months discreetly investigating, discovering that the agency serving the Callahan family was hiring. She had applied, obtained references, and prepared meticulously. She didn't know if it was madness or intuition, but she needed to discover the truth. Could she possibly be Victoria? Madison's heart pounded as she approached the wrought iron gates of the Callahan estate on her first official day. The security guard checked her newly issued ID card and waved her through with a nod. As the gates swung open, a wave of déjà vu washed over her so powerfully that she gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. I've been here before. She pushed the thought away. Of course she hadn't. She'd only seen the mansion on TV and in her dreams. Just nerves about the new job, she told herself. Mrs. Collins, the elderly housekeeper with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted Madison at the service entrance. The children are having breakfast. Mr. Callahan has already left for work and Mrs. Callahan is still asleep, she explained, leading Madison through a maze of hallways. Each turn felt eerily predictable to Madison. When they approached a set of double doors, she found herself anticipating the sunroom beyond, before Mrs. Collins pushed them open. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space filled with potted plants and wicker furniture. How did you know we were going to the sunroom? Mrs. Collins asked, noticing Madison's lack of surprise. Madison blinked. I didn't. Mrs. Collins gave her a curious look, but said nothing more as she led her to the kitchen, where two small children sat at a marble island, attended by a young woman in a chef's apron. Noah, Emma, this is Miss Madison. She'll be taking care of you from now on. Mrs. Collins announced. The twins regarded Madison with identical expressions of cautious interest. Noah, with his father's dark hair and serious eyes, offered a shy wave. Emma, blonde like her mother but with Thomas's strong jawline, studied Madison more boldly. Can you do a cartwheel? Emma asked abruptly. Madison smiled. Not a very good one, but I can teach you if you'd like. Noah's face lit up. Can you read stories with the V voices? Different voices for every character? Madison promised, after breakfast. Madison took the children on a tour of their own home, or rather they took her, excitedly showing off their favorite spots. With each room they entered, Madison felt that strange double vision, seeing the space for the first time while simultaneously feeling she'd walked these floors before. In the grand living room, a family portrait caught her attention. Thomas, much younger, with a beautiful dark-haired woman, and a small girl with golden curls. Victoria. Madison stared at the child's face, feeling a sudden vertigo so intense she had to steady herself against the wall. That's Daddy's first family, Emma said matter-of-factly. Before we were born. We're not allowed to ask about her, Noah added, his voice dropping to a whisper. It makes Daddy sad. Madison tore her gaze away from the portrait. Let's continue our tour, shall we? Outside, the garden was alive with spring blooms. As they approached the stone fountain with its weathered angels, Madison stopped short. In her recurring dreams, this fountain had been a central image, water cascading over stone wings, the faces of the angels worn smooth by time, exactly as it was now. Miss Madison, are you okay? Emma tugged at her hand. Madison forced a smile. Yes, just admiring the fountain. It's beautiful. Daddy says it's been here forever, Noah said. Even before the house. The children raced ahead to a play structure at the far end of the garden, leaving Madison alone with her thoughts. She took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent that permeated the air. Jasmine, another element from her dreams. The same flowers that grew along the eastern wall of the mansion. They seem to like you. The voice startled her. Thomas Callahan stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his tailored suit pants. Mr. Callahan, I didn't expect you home this early. I had a meeting canceled. His eyes moved to his children playing in the distance. Noah hasn't stuttered once since you arrived. That's unusual. Madison smiled. Children respond to feeling safe. He's a bright boy. And Emma hasn't thrown a single tantrum. Another miracle. They shared a quiet laugh. And for a moment, Madison felt a strange connection with this man she barely knew. Something comfortable yet inexplicably sad. The moment was broken by a sharp voice from the terrace. Thomas, what are you doing home? Olivia Callahan descended the garden steps like a runway model, her designer sundress and oversized sunglasses screaming wealth. Her gaze swept over Madison with barely concealed disdain. Checking on the children, Thomas replied. his tone cooling noticeably. Madison has them well in hand. Olivia's perfect smile didn't reach her eyes. How domestic of you? She turned to Madison. The children have very specific routines. I've left detailed instructions in the nursery. I expect them followed to the letter. Of course, Mrs. Callahan, Madison replied evenly. The symphony committee luncheon is at 1. We should leave now to avoid traffic. Olivia linked her arm through her husband's. A possessive gesture that wasn't lost on Madison. Thomas glanced back at the children. I thought I might stay. Spend some time with Noah and Emma. The governor's wife will be disappointed. She specifically asked about your development plans for the riverfront. Olivia's voice was sweet but unyielding. But Madison watched the internal struggle play out on Thomas's face before he surrendered with a nod. I'll say goodbye to the kids first. As the couple walked away, Madison felt a chill despite the warm spring air. Olivia had marked her territory clearly. Thomas was hers. The children were accessories, and Madison was staff. Nothing more. Throughout the day, Madison followed the children's routine while gently introducing her own methods. When Noah struggled with his reading assignment, Madison transformed it into a game where each completed page earned a piece of a puzzle. For Emma's ballet practice, Madison created an imaginary audience of stuffed animals who applauded enthusiastically. By dinner time, both children were flourishing under her attention. They ate without complaint, took their baths without protest, and fell asleep to Madison's storytelling, complete with the promised character voices. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Madison wandered the quiet halls of the mansion. She told herself she was just familiarizing herself with the layout, but in truth, she was following an instinct she couldn't explain. On the second floor, she found herself drawn to a corridor she hadn't explored earlier. 5 doors lined the hallway, all slightly ajar. Except one, a door at the very end. Firmly closed, Madison approached it slowly, her hand inexplicably reaching for the knob before she caught herself. That room is off limits. Madison whirled around to find Mrs. Collins watching her from the shadows. I'm sorry, I was just exploring. Mrs. Collins stepped forward. In the dim light, her lined face looked ancient and knowing. That was Miss Victoria's room. Mr. Callahan has kept it locked since she disappeared. No one goes in. Not even for cleaning. Madison's throat tightened. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Mrs. Collins studied her for a long moment. You remind me of someone, she finally said. Who? But the older woman merely shook her head. Get some rest, dear. Those children will run you ragged tomorrow. Later, in her own room in the staff quarters, Madison couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden, the jasmine flowers glowing pale against the dark foliage. She pulled out her journal and wrote, Day 1 at the Callahan mansion. The déjà vu is stronger than I anticipated. The fountain, the jasmine, the hallways, all exactly as in my dreams. When I saw Victoria's portrait, I felt physically ill. There's a locked room that was hers. Mrs. Collins caught me trying to open it. She said I remind her of someone but wouldn't say who. Am I crazy for being here? For thinking there might be a connection between Victoria's disappearance and my missing childhood? The rational explanation is that I saw this place in a newspaper or on TV as a child, before my amnesia, and it became part of my subconscious. But what if there's more to it? What if I'm not just chasing ghosts? Madison closed the journal and pressed her fingers to her temples, where a headache was forming. Outside, the stone angels of the fountain stood silent in the moonlight, their weathered faces watching over the estate as they had for generations, as if they knew all the secrets the Callahan mansion held, as if they were waiting for those secrets to unravel. Within a week, Madison had transformed the children's daily routine from a rigid schedule of activities into a world of discovery and imagination. Noah's playroom became mission control for space expeditions, complete with a cardboard rocket ship they'd built together. Emma's ballet lessons evolved into grand performances where stuffed animals formed an adoring audience, showering her with silent applause. Look, Miss Madison, Noah took a deep breath, concentrating hard. No stutter. He beamed triumphantly after successfully narrating his latest dinosaur drawing without tripping over his words. That's wonderful. Madison knelt beside him, genuine pride warming her voice. I knew you could do it. Emma twirled over, her princess dress floating around her. "Miss Madison, can we have story time in the garden today, near the angels?" Madison had noticed the children's growing fascination with the stone fountain, the same fountain that appeared in her dreams. "Of course we can. Let's pack a picnic lunch too." As they gathered blankets and books, Madison caught sight of Thomas watching from the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "Daddy!" The twins rushed toward him, Noah clutching his dinosaur drawing. "I hear you two have been on quite the adventures," Thomas said, lifting Emma into his arms while examining Noah's artwork with appropriate gravity. "Very fierce teeth on that T-Rex, buddy." "Miss Madison makes everything fun," Emma declared. "Even math." Thomas's eyes met Madison's over the children's heads. "I've noticed a change in them. They're happier." Something in his gaze made Madison's heart flutter unexpectedly. She looked away, busying herself with the picnic basket. Children respond to creativity and positive reinforcement. They're incredibly bright. They just needed the right approach, later. As the children napped on blankets beneath an oak tree, Madison found herself alone with Thomas near the fountain. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the weathered stone angels. "This fountain is quite unusual," Madison said, running her fingers along the worn edges. "It feels ancient. It predates the house by a century," Thomas replied, watching her hands. "The original property belonged to a Spanish merchant who built the fountain for his wife. She died young, and legend says he carved the angels to watch over her spirit." Madison felt a strange chill despite the warm air. "That's both romantic and sad. My first wife, Grace, used to tell that story to Victoria." Thomas rarely mentioned his lost daughter, and the pain in his voice was palpable. "Victoria loved this fountain. She'd sit here for hours, making up stories about the angels." Madison's throat tightened. "She sounds like a special child." "She was." Thomas stared into the water. "After she disappeared, I nearly had the fountain removed. Couldn't bear to see it. But somehow, it felt wrong, like erasing her." The vulnerability in his confession touched something deep in Madison. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through their moment. "There you are!" Olivia approached, stiletto heels sinking slightly into the manicured lawn, her eyes narrowed at the scene before her. Thomas and Madison standing close by the fountain, the sleeping children nearby. "I've been calling your office for an hour," she said to Thomas, ignoring Madison completely. "My phone was off. I wanted time with the kids. Well, the Richardsons have moved up the dinner to 7, and I still need to stop at Bergdorf's." Olivia's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Thomas hesitated, looking at his sleeping children. "I've got them," Madison assured him. "Take your time. We'll be fine." With obvious reluctance, Thomas followed his wife back to the house. Madison noticed how Olivia placed a proprietary hand on his arm, glancing back with a look that was both triumphant and warning. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Madison encountered Mrs. Collins in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's meal plans. "The little ones are sleeping better since you arrived," the housekeeper remarked. "No more nightmares for Miss Emma," Madison smiled, accepting the cup of tea Mrs. Collins offered. She was having nightmares. Terrible ones, about monsters under her bed, in her closet. Mr. Callahan would sit with her for hours some nights. Mrs. Collins lowered her voice. "Mrs. Callahan said she was just seeking attention, but that child was genuinely frightened." Madison thought about Emma's drawings. Dark shapes with sharp teeth hiding behind colorful houses and smiling stick figures. Children's fears often represent other anxieties they can't express directly. Mrs. Collins nodded, studying Madison with that same curious expression she'd worn several times before. "You understand children, like someone else who lived in this house. Long ago." Madison's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Callahan?" "No." The older woman shook her head. "Miss Victoria's mother, the first Mrs. Callahan, Grace. She had a way with children too, a natural instinct." She hesitated before adding, "You even look a bit like her. Around the eyes." Madison nearly dropped her teacup. "I do. Just something in your expression sometimes." Mrs. Collins sighed, her eyes distant with memory. "That poor woman. Losing her child destroyed her. She and Mr. Callahan tore each other apart with blame afterward. What happened that night?" When Victoria disappeared, Madison tried to keep her voice casual, though her heart was racing. Mrs. Collins glanced toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. It was the annual Christmas gala for the Callahan Foundation. Over 200 guests. Victoria was playing piano earlier. That child was a prodigy, composed her own little melodies. After her performance, she was running around, excited from all the attention. The housekeeper's voice dropped lower. Mr. Callahan saw her heading toward the garden, said she was wearing a blue velvet dress. That was the last time anyone saw her. By midnight, they realized she was missing. By morning, the police were everywhere. Madison felt a strange vertigo. In her recurring dreams, there was always a blue dress, glimpsed only in fragments, the fabric swirling like water. They never found her. Not a trace. Mrs. Collins's lined face looked suddenly ancient in the kitchen's dim light. 3 years of investigations, private detectives, rewards, nothing. It was like that child vanished into thin air. Later that night, unable to sleep, Madison walked the silent corridors of the mansion. The grand house felt different at night, more alive somehow, as if the walls themselves held memories they only released in darkness. She found herself drawn once more to the locked door at the end of the second-floor hallway. Victoria's room, standing before it. Madison felt an inexplicable yearning to see inside, to touch whatever remained of the lost child. As she reached toward the doorknob, knowing it was locked but unable to resist, a floorboard creaked behind her. "You're up late." Madison turned to find Thomas in the shadows, wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants, looking younger without his business attire. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was just curious about her room." It wasn't a question. Thomas approached, stopping beside her to face the door. "I keep it locked. Haven't been inside in years." Madison nodded, embarrassed at being caught. "I should go back to my room." "No, it's all right." Thomas leaned against the wall, studying her in the moonlight that filtered through a nearby window. "I sometimes wander these halls at night too, old habits." The confession created an unexpected intimacy between them. After she disappeared, I kept thinking I'd hear her footsteps, her laugh, that somehow she'd find her way back if I just kept listening. He gave a self-deprecating smile. "Irrational, I know." "Not at all," Madison said softly. "Love isn't rational." Their eyes met in the dim corridor, a moment of understanding passing between them that went beyond words. Thomas looked at her with an intensity that made Madison's breath catch. "There's something about you," he finally said. "Something familiar that I can't quite place." Madison's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. "I have one of those faces, I guess." "No," Thomas shook his head slowly. "It's not that. It's in your mannerisms, the way you tilt your head when you're listening to the children, the way your hands move when you're explaining something." A door opening down the hall broke the moment. Olivia appeared in her silk robe, her perfect features arranged in a frown. "Thomas, what are you doing out here?" His expression shuddered immediately. "Just checking on the children." Olivia's gaze shifted to Madison, then to Victoria's door, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's nearly midnight. Isn't it strange for the nanny to be wandering around at this hour?" "I had trouble sleeping," Madison explained. "New environment." Olivia's skepticism was palpable. "Well, perhaps some warm milk would be more appropriate than lurking outside locked rooms." Thomas straightened, the vulnerable man of moments ago replaced by the controlled billionaire. "Let's go back to bed, Olivia." As they walked away, Madison heard Olivia's whisper, "I don't trust her. There's something off about that girl." Back in her room, Madison stared at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Thomas. The connection she'd felt with him was undeniable and dangerous. Not just because he was her employer, or because of Olivia's obvious hostility, but because it complicated her purpose for being here. She'd come to uncover the truth about her past, about the strange connection between her recurring dreams and the Callahan mansion. Instead, she was developing feelings for a man who might, if her wildest theory proved true, be her father. Madison turned toward the window, where moonlight illuminated the stone angels of the fountain as she drifted to sleep. Her dreams shifted from fragmented images to a more coherent scene. A little girl in a blue dress, playing by the fountain, then running through a crowd, disappearing into darkness. For the first time, In her dream, Madison could see the little girl's face. It was her own. The following week brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in the Callahan household dynamics. Thomas began arriving home earlier, often joining Madison and the children for their afternoon activities. Noah's stutter had all but disappeared when speaking with Madison. Though it still emerged around his mother, Emma's nightmares had ceased entirely. Replaced by dreams of dancing angels she eagerly described at breakfast, these changes did not go unnoticed by Olivia. "I've adjusted the children's schedule," she announced one morning, handing Madison a printed itinerary. "Noah needs more structured academic activities, and Emma is starting private ballet lessons 3 times a week." Madison scanned the rigid hourly breakdown that left little room for play or creativity. "Mrs. Callahan, children their age learn best through—" "I didn't hire you for educational theory," Olivia cut in, her smile razor-sharp. "I hired you to implement my instructions." Madison maintained her professional composure. "Of course, I'll do my best to make these activities engaging for them. Oh, and the children will be attending a charity luncheon with me on Saturday. Designer will be here Friday for fittings. Will Mr. Callahan be joining you?" Madison asked carefully. Something flickered in Olivia's eyes. "My husband has meetings. Not that it's any of your concern." After Olivia left, Madison found ways to incorporate imagination into even the most structured activities. Noah's French vocabulary lessons became a Parisian cafe roleplay, while Emma's handwriting practice transformed into creating invitations for a stuffed animal tea party. When Thomas arrived home that evening, he found them in the library, the children giggling as Madison read, The Little Prince in dramatic voices, somehow connecting it to Noah's French lessons. "Daddy!" The twins scrambled from their nest of pillows, bombarding him with excited accounts of their day. "Miss Madison made us a Paris cafe," Noah explained without a single stutter. "I was the waiter, and took everyone's orders in French. And I wrote all the menus," Emma added proudly. "With my best handwriting." Thomas's gaze shifted to Madison, a smile playing at his lips. "Quite the creative interpretation of my wife's schedule. Educational objectives were met," Madison replied with a hint of mischief. "Just with a bit more." Engagement. That night, Madison overheard an argument between Thomas and Olivia outside the nursery. "The children are flourishing with her methods," Thomas insisted. "They're becoming undisciplined," Olivia countered. "Noah needs structure, not play acting. And Emma is supposed to be focusing on ballet, not making paper menus. Have you noticed Noah barely stutters anymore? Or that Emma hasn't had a nightmare in weeks? What I've noticed," Olivia's voice dropped dangerously, "is that you seem very invested in our new nannies." "Methods." Madison stepped away, not wanting to hear more, but the tension in the house was palpable over the next few days. Olivia began appearing unexpectedly during activities, her critical gaze evaluating Madison's every move. She scheduled conflicting appointments that required Madison to rush the children from one commitment to another, leaving little time for the creative approaches that had been working so well. On Friday afternoon, while the twins were at their mandatory swim lesson with an instructor Olivia had suddenly deemed essential, Madison found herself alone in the East Wing. Mrs. Collins approached, a conspiratorial look on her face. "Mrs. Callahan has gone to her spa appointment," the housekeeper said, "and won't be back until dinner." Madison nodded, uncertain why this warranted the older woman's secretive tone. "Mrs." Collins reached into her pocket and withdrew a small brass key. "I've worked in this house for 30 years. I know when someone belongs here." She pressed the key into Madison's palm. 15 minutes. I'll keep watch." Madison stared at the key, realization dawning. "This opens Victoria's room. I clean it once a month. Mr. Callahan doesn't know. He thinks it remains untouched. But dust is dust." The older woman's eyes held a challenge. "You've been drawn to that door since you arrived. I want to know why." Heart pounding, Madison made her way to the second floor. The key trembled in her hand as she approached the locked door. This was wrong, a violation of Thomas's trust, of family privacy, yet she couldn't stop herself. Whatever lay beyond this door might hold answers to the questions that had haunted her for years. The lock turned with a soft click. Madison stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Time had frozen in Victoria's bedroom. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating a space that still waited for a child who would never return. A canopy bed with a blue comforter. bookshelves lined with children's classics, a child-sized desk where homework once was done. Madison moved through the room as if in a trance, her fingers trailing over surfaces. A collection of porcelain dolls watched from a shelf, their painted eyes following her movements. Ballet slippers hung from a hook on the wall, alongside a calendar from December 2007, forever marking the month Victoria vanished. On the bedside table sat a framed photo of a younger Thomas with the dark-haired woman Madison now knew was Grace. Between them stood Victoria, golden curls framing a smile that struck Madison with physical force. The child's features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, were hauntingly familiar. Madison's breath caught. She'd seen those same features in her bathroom mirror every morning of her adult life. Dizzy, she steadied herself against the desk. Her hand brushed something. A small leather-bound book with a tiny lock. A diary. The key was missing, but the lock was flimsy. With a moment's hesitation and a silent apology, Madison worked it open. Inside were the looping letters of an 8-year-old girl, recording the everyday thoughts of a child. Excitement about Christmas, a new piece she was learning on the piano, a squirrel she'd seen by the fountain. Madison turned to the final entry, dated December 7th, 2007. Dear Diary, tonight is Daddy's big party. Mom says I can wear my new blue dress and play my song, Stars in the Garden, for everyone. I'm nervous but excited. Maybe Mr. Peterson will let me feed the fish in his koi pond after. He promised last time. I have to practice my curtsy now. More tomorrow, love. Victoria. There was no more tomorrow. This was the last thing Victoria Callahan had ever written. Madison closed the diary with trembling hands. On impulse, she moved to the closet, sliding open the door to reveal a collection of children's clothes preserved like museum pieces. At the end hung a small blue velvet dress, the dress from her dreams, the one Victoria had worn the night she disappeared. Madison reached out, her fingertips brushing the soft fabric. A jolt like electricity shot through her, bringing a flash of memory so vivid it stole her breath. Excited voices, glittering jewelry, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with pine from Christmas decorations, piano keys beneath small fingers. Applause, pride, then outside. Cool air, the fountain splashing, the garden path leading toward the service gate where a car waited. A stranger's hand. Fear. Madison staggered back, knocking into the bedside table. The framed photo crashed to the floor, glass shattering. What are you doing in here? Madison whirled around to find Olivia in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. I was just... You were just getting yourself fired. Olivia stepped into the room, her eyes taking in the broken picture frame, the open diary, the closet door ajar. How dare you invade this private space? Who gave you the key? Madison struggled to find words, still reeling from the memory flash. Mrs. Callahan, I can explain. Save it for my husband, Olivia snapped, pulling out her phone. He's on his way home. I called him the moment Mrs. Collins told me you'd gone snooping. Madison's heart sank. Mrs. Collins had betrayed her, but the look of confusion on Olivia's face made it clear. The housekeeper hadn't told Olivia about giving her the key. She'd simply informed her that Madison was upstairs, allowing Olivia to catch her in the act. 20 minutes later, Madison sat in Thomas's study, feeling like a criminal awaiting sentencing. Olivia stood by the window, triumphant, while Thomas sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. I'm deeply disappointed, he said finally. That room was private, sacred even. I know, Madison whispered. I'm sorry. She broke into it, Thomas, Olivia pressed. Who knows what she was looking for? Jewelry? Information. She could be a reporter or working for one of your competitors. Thomas held up a hand, silencing his wife. I'd like to hear Madison's explanation. Madison took a deep breath. How could she explain what she herself didn't fully understand? That she'd been drawn to this house by dreams. That she suspected an impossible connection to their lost daughter. The truth is, she began slowly, I've been fascinated by Victoria's story since I saw a report about her disappearance. I know how inappropriate my curiosity was, and I apologize. It was a terrible invasion of privacy. Olivia scoffed. You're fired. Pack your things. Olivia. Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. This is my decision. She broke into our daughter's room. Olivia's composure cracked. Our daughter, not hers. An uncomfortable silence fell. Madison realized with a start that Olivia had revealed something crucial. She thought of Victoria as her daughter, though she'd married Thomas years after the girl's disappearance. It was a fiction Olivia maintained, perhaps to strengthen her position in the family. Thomas turned to Madison, his expression softening slightly. We'll discuss this further tomorrow. For now, please continue your duties with the children. They shouldn't be punished for this. Indiscretion. As Madison left the study, she passed Mrs. Collins in the hallway. The older woman slipped something into her hand. A small brass key. Keep it, she whispered. You'll need it again before this is over. The next morning, Madison expected to find her suitcase waiting by the door. Instead, Mrs. Collins informed her that Thomas wanted to see her in his study after breakfast, with the children at their Saturday swim class. Madison had no buffer against the conversation ahead. She found Thomas standing by the window, gazing at the stone fountain. Without turning, he said, "Close the door." Madison complied, her heart hammering against her ribs. The study felt smaller today, the air heavy with unasked questions. Why Victoria's room? Thomas finally turned to face her. Of all the boundaries you could have crossed. Why that one? Madison had rehearsed explanations all night. But facing Thomas now, only the truth felt right. I've been having dreams about this house for as long as I can remember. The fountain, the jasmine garden, even the hallways. They've all been part of my dreams since childhood. Thomas's expression remained neutral, but she noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his desk. When I saw the report about Victoria's disappearance 6 months ago, I recognized your home immediately, she continued. It was unsettling. I took this job to understand why this place feels so familiar. You expect me to believe that? No, she admitted. It sounds crazy, even to me, but it's the truth. Thomas studied her face as if searching for deception. What happened in Victoria's room? Olivia said you seemed to have some kind of episode. Madison swallowed hard. Should she tell him about the memory flash? About seeing herself in Victoria's features? It would sound delusional. The room was overwhelming, she said instead. All those preserved memories, the diary entry from the day she disappeared. It affected me deeply. You read her diary. It wasn't a question. Yes, I'm sorry. Thomas paced behind his desk. Under normal circumstances, you would be fired. But the children, he paused. Noah and Emma have made remarkable progress with you. To disrupt that now would hurt them. Relief washed over Madison. I won't betray your trust again. See that you don't. His tone softened slightly. And stay away from Victoria's room. Whatever fascination you have with my daughter's story. That space is sacred to this family. Madison nodded, understanding she'd been granted a reprieve she hardly deserved. As she turned to leave, Thomas added, And Madison, Olivia doesn't need to know about our conversation. As far as she's concerned, I've issued you a final warning. The days that followed were tense. Olivia increased her surveillance, appearing unexpectedly during activities, and questioning the children about their time with Madison. The twins, sensing the undercurrents, became clingy with Madison and wary around their mother. Madison threw herself into caring for the children, pushing aside her personal investigation, yet the memory flash from Victoria's room haunted her. That brief, visceral glimpse of the night Victoria disappeared had felt less like imagination and more like recovered memory. One afternoon, while the twins napped under Mrs. Collins's watch, Madison found herself drawn to the library. If she couldn't access Victoria's room, perhaps public records could provide answers. The Callahan mansion boasted an extensive collection of local historical documents and newspapers, neatly organized on built-in shelves. She located bound copies of the Chicago Tribune from 2007 and 2008. Turning carefully to December, the headlines leapt out at her. Real estate mogul's daughter missing, followed by weeks of updates as the search continued. Photos showed Thomas and Grace, grief-stricken, pleading for information, police statements, witness interviews, reward announcements, all leading nowhere. A January article caught her attention. Security breach at Callahan estate investigated. According to the report, Authorities discovered that a catering van had left the property without proper clearance during the critical time frame of Victoria's disappearance. The driver, identified as Raymond Mercer, had been hired through a third-party staffing agency for the event. Madison's pulse quickened. This was new information. She skimmed ahead, finding a small article from February. Body of catering worker found in submerged vehicle. Raymond Mercer's car had been discovered in the Chicago River. Having apparently veered off a bridge during a snowstorm, his body was recovered inside. The coincidence seemed too great. A catering worker leaves the Callahan estate without clearance. The night Victoria disappears, then ends up dead in a submerged car weeks later. Madison carefully photographed the articles with her phone. Research project. Madison started at the voice. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. Madison hesitated, then decided on honesty. Looking through the coverage of Victoria's disappearance. Thomas approached slowly, his eyes falling to the newspapers. I've read every word written about that night, multiple times. There's nothing there but speculation and dead ends. I noticed something about a catering worker, Madison ventured. Raymond Mercer. Did they ever connect him directly to Victoria's disappearance? A shadow crossed Thomas's face. They tried. His van left without being properly checked by security, but the timing was off. He clocked out after Victoria was already missing, and when they found his body weeks later, there was no evidence linking him to her. It just seems like a strange coincidence. Life is full of those. Thomas carefully closed the newspaper volume. The police investigated every angle. Private detectives, too. For years, Madison sensed his pain and changed the subject. The children asked if we could have a picnic by the fountain tomorrow. Would that be all right? Thomas nodded, relieved at the shift. They loved that fountain almost as much as Victoria did. Later that afternoon, Madison took the children to the eastern garden, where jasmine climbed trellises in fragrant cascades. As Noah and Emma played tag around the flower beds, Madison closed her eyes, inhaling the sweet scent. Another memory flash hit her, stronger than before. Small hands picking jasmine flowers, a woman's gentle laugh. Not too many, Victoria. Save some for the garden. Threading the blossoms into a little crown, wearing it while playing the piano. The scent filling the music room as small fingers danced across the keys. Madison gasped, steadying herself against a trellis. These weren't dreams or imagination. They were too specific, too sensory to be anything but memories. Miss Madison, are you okay? Emma tugged at her sleeve, concern in her young eyes. Madison forced a smile. Just a little dizzy from the sun. Let's find some shade. They moved to a stone bench beneath an oak tree, where Madison began reading a story to the children. Halfway through, she noticed Thomas watching them from the terrace, a strange expression on his face. Not suspicion, but something more like wonder. That evening, Madison found Mrs. Collins waiting outside her bedroom. You've been asking questions, the housekeeper said without preamble. Madison hesitated. I'm trying to understand what happened to Victoria. Mrs. Collins glanced down the hallway before speaking. There was a theory the police dismissed too quickly about the catering staff. Raymond Mercer. Not just him. The agency that provided staff for the gala had connections to some unsavory characters. There were rumors about child trafficking rings targeting wealthy families. Madison's blood ran cold. You think Victoria was targeted specifically? I don't know, but I do know that 3 months before Victoria disappeared, another child from a wealthy family went missing in similar circumstances. A charity event. Lots of outside staff coming and going. That case is still unsolved too. Did you tell the police this? Of course. They investigated but found no concrete connections. Mrs. Collins hesitated. There's something else. Something I've never told anyone. Madison waited, barely breathing. The night Victoria disappeared, I saw her talking to a man in a catering uniform near the service entrance. I assumed he worked for us, so I didn't think anything of it at the time. The older woman's eyes grew distant with memory. It wasn't until later, when they showed me photos of the staff, that I realized I'd never seen that man before. Did you tell the police? Yes, but by then it was too late. They never identified him. The following morning, Madison woke early, her mind racing with new questions. She slipped out to the garden before the household stirred, drawn once more to the stone fountain. The angel figures stood silent in the dawn light, water cascading over their weathered wings. Madison sat on the edge, trailing her fingers through the cool water. Another flash hit her, brief but vivid, leaning over this same fountain rim, watching coins shimmer below, making wishes. A man's voice, Thomas's voice, younger but unmistakable. "What did you wish for, princess?" A child's giggle. "Can't tell, or it won't come true." "Daddy? It's peaceful here at dawn." Madison turned to find Thomas approaching, 2 coffee cups in hand. He offered one to her, then sat beside her on the fountain's edge, leaving careful distance between them. "Thank you," she said, accepting the coffee. "For not firing me yesterday." Thomas nodded, staring into the rippling water. "The children need you." After a pause, he added softly, "They're not the only ones who've noticed a change since you arrived." The admission hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. In the silence that followed, Madison gathered her courage. "Mr. Callahan," she began carefully, "what if Victoria didn't just disappear? What if she survived somehow, but couldn't find her way back?" Thomas's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "Don't," he said, his voice strained. "I've tortured myself with what-ifs for 18 years. They lead nowhere but deeper into grief." "I'm sorry," Madison whispered. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the lawn. In the distance, the mansion windows began to light up as the household awakened. "Victoria loved jasmine," Thomas said suddenly. "She used to make little crowns from the flowers." Madison's breath caught. She hadn't mentioned her memory flash to anyone. "The scent always reminds me of her," he continued, oblivious to Madison's reaction. "Sometimes I walk through that eastern garden just to remember." As they rose to return to the house, their hands brushed accidentally. A jolt of recognition passed between them, something deeper than attraction, more complex than employer and employee. For a moment, Madison saw confusion flicker in Thomas's eyes, as if he too sensed something inexplicable connecting them. Behind a second-floor window, Olivia watched, her perfect features hardening into a mask of cold fury. The charity luncheon Olivia had planned arrived with all its pomp and circumstance. As Madison helped Emma into her frilly designer dress, she noticed the child's unusual quiet. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Madison asked, gently combing through Emma's blonde curls. "I don't like these parties," Emma confessed. "Everyone pinches my cheeks and says I look pretty, but no one actually talks to me." Noah, already uncomfortable in his miniature suit, nodded in agreement. "My mom gets mad if we don't smile enough." Madison's heart ached for them. "Tell you what, let's create a secret game. Every time someone says something silly to you, pretend you're secret agents gathering information. Later, we can compare notes and see who collected the funniest comments." The twins brightened at this, their expressions shifting from dread to conspiratorial excitement. By the time Olivia appeared to inspect them, they were giggling together. "What's so amusing?" Olivia asked, her tone suggesting nothing should be amusing about a charity event. "Just a little game to help them manage their nerves," Madison explained. Olivia's eyes narrowed. "The Whitman Foundation donors don't pay $10,000 a plate to see nervous children, Miss Hale. They expect to see the perfectly behaved heirs to the Callahan fortune." She turned to the twins. "Remember, best behavior, Noah. Watch your stutter, Emma, proper posture." Madison bit her tongue, reminding herself that her job was to support the children, not critique their mother's parenting after the Callahans departed in their chauffeured car. Madison found herself with an unexpected afternoon free. Mrs. Collins had also gone out, leaving Madison alone in the massive house. The silence felt like an opportunity. She hesitated only briefly before retrieving the brass key from its hiding place beneath her mattress. Victoria's room called to her, promising answers to questions she was only beginning to formulate. This time, Madison entered with purpose, systematically examining the preserved childhood. She checked beneath the mattress, behind picture frames, inside desk drawers, looking for anything that might connect Victoria's disappearance to her own mysterious past. In the closet, behind a row of small dresses, Madison discovered a loose panel in the wall. Sliding it aside revealed a child's hiding place, containing a small box decorated with seashells. Inside lay childhood treasures, pretty stones, dried flowers, a sparkly hair clip, and a folded piece of paper. Madison carefully unfolded it, revealing a child's drawing of the stone fountain, with stick figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy" in the water. Something dark lurked, a shape with sharp teeth. A note in a child's handwriting read, "I saw it again by the fountain, the monster from my dreams." Madison shivered. Had Victoria been afraid of something? Or someone? Before she disappeared, the monster in the water reminded Madison of Emma's nightmares and drawings. Like mother, like daughter, the thought froze Madison in place. Was she seriously considering the possibility that she was Victoria? As she carefully replaced everything, Madison caught sight of herself in Victoria's vanity mirror. For a dizzying moment, she could almost superimpose the child's features from the photographs over her own. The same wide-set eyes, the same curve to the mouth. Coincidence or something more? Madison left the room, locking it behind her. Her head pounded with questions that had no logical answers. She needed air, space to think. Downstairs, she wandered through the quiet house, eventually finding herself in the grand living room where the white grand piano stood. The instrument had always been covered with a velvet cloth when she'd seen it before. Today, oddly, the cover had been removed. The ivory keys gleamed in the afternoon light, inviting touch. Madison approached slowly. She had basic musical training, enough to teach simple songs to children, but nothing that would explain the pull she felt toward this particular piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. A memory surfaced. Small hands on these same keys. A melody flowing without effort. A sense of joy and pride. Before she could question it, Madison sat on the bench and placed her hands on the keyboard. They began to move on their own, as if remembering a piece she'd never learned. The melody that emerged was delicate, yet complex, with unexpected harmonic shifts and a haunting refrain that seemed to speak of both sorrow and hope. Her fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that bewildered her. Drawing out a composition she couldn't consciously recall, Madison lost herself in the music, unaware of tears streaming down her face or the passage of time. The melody seemed to unlock something deep within her. Not concrete memories, but emotions. Belonging, security, love, and then sudden fear, confusion, darkness. She didn't hear the front door open, didn't notice Thomas standing in the doorway, frozen in shock. As the last notes faded, Madison opened her eyes, disoriented. How did she know that piece? Where had it come from? That's not possible. Thomas's voice startled her. Madison spun around on the piano bench to find him watching her, his face ashen. "Mr. Callahan, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched the piano without permission." "That song," he interrupted, stepping closer. "How do you know that song?" Madison faltered. I don't know. My hands just seem to remember it." "Remember?" Thomas's voice cracked. "That song has never been recorded. It was never written down. It's called Stars in the Garden. Victoria composed it herself when she was 7 years old." Madison's heart stuttered. "That's not possible. I must have heard it somewhere." "No." Thomas was directly in front of her now, his eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. "No one has played that melody in this house since Victoria disappeared. No one but Victoria ever knew exactly how it went." The implications hung in the air between them. Madison felt lightheaded, reality tilting beneath her. "I should go," she whispered, rising from the bench. Thomas caught her arm. "Wait, please." His touch sent another cascade of memory fragments through her, being carried on these same shoulders, feeling safe and loved, a child's complete trust in her father. "Who are you?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. "Who are you really, Madison Hale?" "I don't know anymore," she answered truthfully. "I've been having flashes, memories that can't possibly be mine. Of this house, the fountain, the jasmine garden." She hesitated before adding, "Of you." Thomas released her arm, stepping back as if burned. "What kind of game are you playing?" "No game," Madison said, tears threatening again. "I was found with severe amnesia when I was 8 years old. No identification, no memory of my life before. The doctor said it was dissociative amnesia from trauma. I was taken in by a couple who gave me the name Madison Hale." 8 years old, Thomas repeated, his analytical mind making connections. When were you found? Early 2008. January, by a river near a convent in rural Illinois. Thomas staggered slightly, bracing himself against the piano. That's impossible. I know how it sounds, Madison said. Believe me, I've been telling myself I'm crazy since the first day I walked into this house and felt like I'd come home. Thomas's gaze bore into her, desperate for truth yet afraid of false hope. Do you remember anything specific? Anything about her? Madison hesitated, then decided to risk everything. I remember making flower crowns from jasmine. I remember a blue velvet dress. I remember sitting at this piano while you said, "Play it again, princess." Thomas's breath caught. Princess, his private nickname for Victoria. Your wife, Grace. She had a perfume she wore, Lily of the Valley, and there was a book you used to read to me about a little girl who could talk to animals. Madison's words tumbled out now, fragments assembling themselves as she spoke. And the fountain. I always thought there was something in the water watching me. I drew pictures of it. Thomas sank onto the piano bench, his legs no longer supporting him. This isn't possible, he whispered, though his eyes never left Madison's face. We searched everywhere, for years. I was found with no identification, severe head trauma and complete amnesia, Madison said softly. By the time I was placed with a foster family, you had probably stopped looking in new places. Thomas shook his head, unwilling or unable to process what she was suggesting. You're saying you're Victoria, my daughter. Before Madison could respond, the front door opened again. Olivia's voice rang through the foyer, accompanied by the twins' excited chatter. We're home early. The luncheon was a disaster. Food poisoning at table 7, Thomas. Are you here? The car is outside. Thomas and Madison stared at each other. The moment broken, he stood quickly, straightening his jacket. Not a word of this to anyone, he said under his breath. Especially not to Olivia. Madison nodded, moving away from the piano as Olivia entered the room, the twins trailing behind her. There you are, Olivia said to Thomas, before her gaze shifted to Madison, then to the uncovered piano. Her perfect features hardened. What's going on here? Madison was just checking if the piano needed tuning, Thomas improvised. I mentioned it seemed off-key recently. Olivia's suspicious gaze lingered on Madison. And does it? The upper register is a bit sharp, Madison replied evenly, though her hands were trembling. Nothing serious. Olivia clearly didn't believe them, but the twins provided a welcome distraction, running to Madison with eager accounts of the luncheon disaster. As Madison led the children upstairs for a change of clothes, she felt Thomas's gaze following her, filled with questions, suspicion, and the dangerous flicker of hope. That night, Madison couldn't sleep. She'd played Victoria's unique composition, a piece no one but Victoria could have known. Either she was experiencing some form of psychic phenomenon, or the impossible was true. She was Victoria Callahan, returned to her family after 18 years, with no memory of her true identity. Outside her window, the stone angels of the fountain stood silent, witness to secrets still unfolding, while inside the mansion, a father lay awake, torn between hope and the fear of being broken by loss. A second time, Thomas Callahan hadn't built a real estate empire by acting on intuition alone. Evidence, data, and verification formed the foundation of every decision he made, which was why he found himself in his private study at 2 a.m., making a call he never thought he'd make again. Jack, it's Thomas Callahan. I know it's late, but this can't wait. Jack Mercer had been the lead private investigator on Victoria's case for 3 years. Though officially retired now, he answered on the second ring. Alert despite the hour. Thomas, been a long time. I need your services again, discreetly. A pause. Is this about Victoria? Thomas gripped the phone tighter. Possibly. I need you to investigate someone. A woman working in my household. Name, Madison Hale, 26 years old. Claims to have grown up in foster care after being found with amnesia in early 2008. I need everything. Background, medical records, the identity of the couple who took her in. Most importantly, I need to know where and exactly when she was found. This sounds personal. Thomas, what am I looking for? Thomas hesitated, unwilling to voice his suspicion aloud, afraid of both ridicule and false hope. "Just get me the facts. And Jack, no one can know about this, especially not Olivia." After hanging up, Thomas pulled out his laptop and opened a file he hadn't touched in years. The digital archive of Victoria's case. Thousands of documents, photos, interview transcripts, and investigative reports. He scrolled to the medical section, reviewing the DNA samples they had preserved. A lock of Victoria's hair, a toothbrush, blood samples from medical checkups. It would be simple enough to obtain Madison's DNA, a hair from her brush, a discarded coffee cup. But was he ready for the answer? Whatever it might be, Thomas finally fell asleep at his desk, awakening to Olivia's voice on the intercom. "Thomas, are you still in your study? The Wilson meeting is in an hour." He straightened, rubbing his neck. "I'll be ready." The next few days unfolded in a strange dance of normalcy and underlying tension. Madison continued caring for the children while Thomas watched her with new eyes, cataloging every mannerism, every expression, searching for Victoria in the woman before him. Several times he nearly confronted her again, only to retreat at the last moment, unwilling to build hope on nothing more substantial than a piano melody and a few coincidences. Madison, for her part, felt Thomas's scrutiny, but focused on the children, using their needs as a shield against the growing storm of questions in her mind. Was she really Victoria Callahan? And if so, what had happened that night 18 years ago, on Thursday evening? Thomas's private phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Information secured. Meeting tonight, 10 p.m. Usual place." The usual place was a private room above an old jazz club in downtown Chicago, where Thomas and Jack had spent countless hours during the original investigation. The club had changed hands twice since then, but the private room remained, accessible through a separate entrance for discreet meetings. At precisely 10 p.m., Thomas entered to find Jack Mercer waiting with a folder and a grim expression. Though in his 70s now, Jack retained the sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor of his detective days. "This is either the strangest coincidence I've ever seen," Jack began without preamble, "or something I can't quite wrap my head around." He opened the folder, spreading photographs and documents across the table. Madison Hale's official history begins January 17, 2008, when she was found by Sister Agnes of St. Catherine's Convent near Riverdale, Illinois. The sister was walking along the riverbank after a major storm when she discovered a child unconscious on the shore, a girl approximately 8 years old with severe head trauma and hypothermia. Thomas stared at a hospital photo of a small, pale child with bandages covering half her face. Despite the injuries, something in the set of the jaw, the shape of the eyes. The child had no identification, Jack continued. She was wearing only a torn nightgown, no coat despite the winter weather. When she regained consciousness 3 days later, she had no memory of her name, her family, or how she ended up by the river. Thomas's throat tightened. The date, January 17, 2008. That's exactly 6 weeks after Victoria disappeared, Jack confirmed. The location is approximately 30 miles downstream from where Raymond Mercer's car was found submerged. Thomas gripped the edge of the table. Raymond Mercer, the catering worker. Yes, his body was recovered inside the vehicle, but the car's rear door was open. Police theorized he lost control during a snowstorm, crashed through the guardrail, and the car filled with water. The open door suggested he tried to escape but was overcome by the current. Or, Thomas said slowly, someone else escaped through that door. Jack nodded grimly. The timing fits. If Mercer took Victoria that night, but crashed into the river weeks later during the January storms, the child could have been thrown clear, carried downstream. Why wasn't this connection made back then? Thomas demanded, anger rising through his shock. Because no one was looking for a connection. By the time this Jane Doe appeared, Victoria's case was focused on known kidnapping rings, not a random catering worker. Different jurisdictions, different case parameters. Jack spread out more papers. The convent registered the child as a ward of the state. She was placed in foster care with Martin and Eleanor Hale, who later gave her the name Madison. Jack slid across a death certificate. The Hales died in a car accident when Madison was 16. After that, she bounced between foster homes until she aged out of the system at 18. Thomas examined a copy of Madison's driver's license photo alongside a digitally aged projection of Victoria that the FBI had created years ago. The resemblance was undeniable. "There's one more thing," Jack said quietly, placing a sealed envelope on the table. "I took the liberty of obtaining DNA samples from Madison's apartment, hair from her brush, and I had it compared against Victoria's DNA profile from your family samples." Thomas stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid. "And 99.9% match, Thomas. She's your daughter." The room seemed to tilt. Thomas gripped the table harder, wave after wave of emotion crashing through him. Shock, disbelief, elation, fear, anger at years lost. "My God," he whispered. "She came back. She found her way back. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jack asked. "Does she know? Is that why she sought employment with your family?" "She suspects," Thomas said, thinking of Madison's face at the piano. "She's been having memory flashes, but she doesn't know for certain." "Be careful, Thomas. This is going to turn your whole world upside down." Thomas gathered the documents with trembling hands. "My world turned upside down 18 years ago, Jack." This would be setting it right. When Thomas returned home, the house was quiet. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and found himself standing outside Victoria's room, using the master key he kept in his study. He unlocked the door and stepped inside for the first time in years. Everything remained as it had been, preserved like a museum exhibit dedicated to his lost child. Except now, Thomas noticed subtle signs of disturbance. The closet door not quite closed, the vanity chair at a different angle, the photo frame on the bedside table slightly askew. Madison had been here, searching for answers, searching for herself. Thomas sat on the edge of the small bed, touching the blue comforter Victoria had chosen herself. His daughter was alive. The miracle he'd stopped believing in had happened. She had returned, drawn back to her home by some unconscious memory that survived trauma and amnesia. But how to tell her? How to explain what the DNA test confirmed without overwhelming her? And what about Olivia and the twins? As if summoned by his thoughts, Olivia appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to concern when she saw him sitting in Victoria's preserved room. "Thomas, what are you doing in here? It's past midnight." He couldn't meet her eyes. "Just thinking." She entered cautiously, as if the room were sacred ground. "About Victoria?" "Yes." Olivia sat beside him, placing a manicured hand over his. "I know this time of year is always difficult. The anniversary of her disappearance is coming up." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. Should he tell Olivia now? How would she react to the news that Madison, the nanny she already resented, was actually his long-lost daughter? "There's something I need to tell you," he began, but Olivia cut him off. "Actually, I need to tell you something first," she said, her expression unusually serious. "I've been doing some research on Madison Hale." Thomas froze. "What?" "After finding her in Victoria's room, I became suspicious. I hired someone to look into her background." Olivia pulled out her phone, showing him a series of photographs. "She's been observed meeting with a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. I believe she's planning to sell a story about our family, perhaps about Victoria." Thomas stared at the photos. They showed Madison sitting in a cafe with a man Olivia identified as journalist Eric Powell, who specialized in cold cases and true crime stories. "There's more," Olivia continued. "Powell has been researching the Victoria Callahan case for months. He's working on a book or documentary, something that will dredge up all that pain again. I believe Madison approached us deliberately to gain insider information." Thomas's mind raced. The photos were real, but the interpretation could be completely wrong. What if Madison had been seeking information about her own past, not planning to exploit the Callahan tragedy? "I want her gone, Thomas," Olivia stated firmly. "Tomorrow morning, before she can do any more damage to this family, to our children." Thomas stood, needing space to think. "Let me handle this my way, Olivia. There may be more to this situation than you realize." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "What aren't you telling me? Just trust me on this. I'll speak with Madison tomorrow." After Olivia left, Thomas remained in Victoria's room, surrounded by memories of the past and faced with decisions that would shape his family's future. His daughter had returned, a miracle beyond imagining, but the path forward was fraught with complications. By dawn, Thomas had formulated a plan. He would confront Madison with what he knew, show her the DNA results, and help her process the truth gradually. Together, they would decide how to tell the twins, and eventually, Grace, Victoria's mother, would need to know her daughter was alive. Olivia was the wild card. Thomas had no illusions about her reaction. She had married him knowing the tragedy in his past, but a resurrected Victoria would threaten everything Olivia had built: her position, her influence, her control over the Callahan legacy. As the first light of morning filtered through Victoria's lace curtains, Thomas made his decision. His daughter had found her way home against impossible odds. Whatever storm followed, he would weather it. Victoria was alive. Nothing else mattered. Madison awoke with a strange sense of anticipation, as if her body knew something momentous was coming, before her mind caught up. She'd been dreaming of the fountain again, but this time the dream had shifted. Instead of watching as a child, she was an adult, looking at her reflection in the water and seeing a little girl with golden curls staring back. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "My study, 10 a.m. The children will be with their tutor." The formal tone sent a wave of anxiety through her. Had Olivia finally convinced him to fire her? Or was this about their conversation at the piano? About the impossible melody her hands had remembered? Madison dressed carefully in a simple blouse and skirt, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned back her chestnut hair. In the mirror, she studied her own features, trying to see what Thomas might have seen when she played Victoria's song. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, features that had always been hers, yet suddenly felt like clues to a mystery she was only beginning to unravel. At precisely 10 a.m., Madison knocked on the study door. "Come in," Thomas called. She entered to find him standing by the window, tension evident in his posture. A folder lay on his desk, alongside a pot of coffee and 2 cups. Whatever this meeting was about, he expected it to take time. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Madison complied, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. "Is everything all right, Mr. Callahan? Have I done something wrong?" Thomas took his seat, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I met with someone last night, a private investigator who worked on Victoria's case years ago." Madison's breath caught. This wasn't what she had expected. "We discussed some unusual coincidences," Thomas continued carefully. "About you, about your past." "My past." Madison's mouth went dry. "You told me you were found with amnesia when you were 8 years old. What you didn't mention was the date, January 17th, 2008, 6 weeks after Victoria disappeared." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I didn't make the connection. You were found on a riverbank 30 miles downstream from where a car had been submerged weeks earlier. The car belonged to Raymond Mercer, the catering worker who left the Callahan estate without clearance the night Victoria vanished. Madison stared at him, pieces clicking together in her mind. "You think there's a connection between my being found and Victoria's disappearance?" "I know there is." Thomas slid the folder across the desk. "This contains hospital records from when you were found, the police report, and documents from your time in foster care." With trembling fingers, Madison opened the folder. The first photograph showed a small, injured child in a hospital bed, bandages covering half her face. Eyes closed, the date stamp confirmed Thomas's claim, January 17th, 2008. "I don't remember any of this," she whispered. "The doctors diagnosed you with traumatic amnesia. Your head injury was severe, consistent with impact trauma from a car accident." Thomas leaned forward. "Madison, look at the next document." She turned the page and found herself staring at a DNA analysis report. The scientific terminology swam before her eyes, but the conclusion was unmistakable. 99.9% probability of parent-child relationship between Thomas Callahan and subject. Madison looked up, unable to process what she was seeing. "This can't be real. I obtained your DNA from your hairbrush," Thomas admitted. "I had to know for certain before having this conversation." "You're saying—" Madison couldn't finish the sentence. The implications too overwhelming. "You're Victoria," Thomas said softly. "My daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Impossible yet undeniable. Madison felt as though she were falling, reality shifting beneath her. "But that's not possible," she managed. Even as another part of her recognized the truth in it, "I would remember something. Your amnesia was profound. The trauma of the accident, the hypothermia. The doctors weren't sure you'd recover at all. Thomas's voice was gentle but insistent. When you did, you had no memories of your life before. The convent registered you as a Jane Doe, and eventually, you were placed with the Hales, who gave you the name Madison. Madison stood abruptly, needing to move. If this is true, if I really am Victoria, why didn't anyone connect me to your missing daughter? There must have been pictures everywhere, news reports. By the time you were found, Victoria's case had shifted focus. The police were investigating organized kidnapping rings, not looking at accident victims in hospitals 50 miles away. Thomas's expression clouded. It was my fault. I pushed them to focus on professional kidnappers, convinced Victoria had been targeted because of my wealth. The possibility that a catering worker had taken her, then crashed into a river during a winter storm. It wasn't even on our radar. Madison paced the study, her mind racing. But why would this Raymond Mercer take me, take Victoria, in the first place? We may never know for certain. He might have been working with a trafficking ring, or it could have been opportunistic. What matters is what happened afterward. Thomas stood, moving cautiously toward her. Somehow, you survived the crash. You were carried downstream, found by that nun, and given a new identity. And 18 years later, drawn by something beyond conscious memory, you found your way back home. Madison stopped at the window, gazing out at the stone fountain, the fountain from her dreams. Her hands gripped the windowsill as fragments of memory assaulted her. Sitting at that piano, small fingers learning the keys, running through the gardens, laughing as someone, as her father, chased her. The scent of jasmine as she wove flowers into a crown. The melody, she whispered. Stars in the garden. I really did compose it, didn't I? When you were 7, Thomas confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. You played it at the Christmas gala, just hours before you disappeared. Madison turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to be her. I've been Madison Hale my entire conscious life. You don't have to be anyone but who you are now, Thomas said gently. Victoria is part of you. She always has been, even when you didn't remember. But who you've become as Madison matters too. The sincerity in his eyes broke something open inside her. This man, her father, wasn't asking her to erase her identity and become someone else. He was offering to help her integrate the fragments, to make her whole. There's someone else who needs to know, Thomas continued. Your mother, Grace. She never remarried after our divorce, never fully recovered from losing you. Madison felt a flash of memory, a woman's gentle hands braiding her hair, the scent of lily of the valley perfume, a soft voice singing lullabies. She lives in Boston now, Thomas explained. I called her this morning. She's flying in tonight. Tonight. Panic flared in Madison's chest. That's too soon. I'm not ready. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, Thomas assured her. But Grace has waited 18 years to know what happened to her daughter. To know you're alive. Madison nodded, understanding the weight of that waiting. What about Olivia and the twins? Thomas's expression tightened. That's more complicated. Olivia has suspicions about you, different ones. She thinks you're working with a journalist to expose the family. What? That's not true. I know. But Olivia feels threatened by you. Even before this revelation, she wants you gone. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. As for the twins, they adore you. Finding out you're their half-sister will be an adjustment, but children are adaptable. Madison sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. In less than an hour, her entire understanding of herself had been upended. She wasn't an orphan who'd grown up in foster care. She was Victoria Callahan, kidnapped at age 8, presumed dead for 18 years. I need time, she said finally. Time to process this. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, but there's one more thing you should see. He moved to a small safe behind a painting on the wall, entering a combination before removing a velvet box. This belonged to Victoria. To you. Madison opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a delicate gold locket on a chain. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal 2 photos. A younger Thomas on one side, Grace on the other. Another memory surfaced. opening this same locket on Christmas morning, joy bubbling up as her father fastened it around her neck. "Now you'll always have us with you, princess." With shaking hands, Madison lifted the necklace. Thomas moved behind her, taking it gently and fastening it around her neck, just as he had done 18 years earlier. The weight of the locket against her skin felt simultaneously foreign and utterly familiar. "I don't know what happens next," Madison admitted, touching the locket. "Neither do I," Thomas said honestly, "but we'll figure it out together." As Madison left the study, the reality of her new identity, her true identity, began to sink in. She was Victoria Callahan. The lost girl had found her way home, even if her conscious mind hadn't known that's what she was doing. And somewhere in the house, Olivia was plotting to remove her, unaware that the woman she saw as a threat was actually her husband's daughter, the rightful Callahan heir whose return would reshape the entire family dynamic. Madison, or Victoria, she wasn't sure which name to claim now, retreated to her room after the life-altering meeting with Thomas. She clutched the locket at her throat, a physical link to a past she couldn't fully remember. Looking in the mirror, she searched her reflection for the little girl in the photographs. For Victoria Callahan beneath Madison Hale's features. "Who am I?" she whispered to her reflection. The woman staring back had no clear answer. For 18 years, she'd been Madison, orphan, survivor, caretaker of other people's children. Yet according to DNA and the fragmented memories surfacing with increasing frequency, she was also Victoria, beloved daughter, piano prodigy, kidnapping victim. Could she be both? Or would embracing one identity mean erasing the other? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Collins stood at the door, her lined face grave. "He told you." "Then," the housekeeper said. Not a question, but a statement. Madison blinked in surprise. "You knew. Not for certain, but I suspected from your first day here." Mrs. Collins entered, closing the door behind her. "There was something in your eyes, your mannerisms, and you went straight to the fountain, Victoria's favorite place. Did you tell Thomas your suspicions?" "No, dear. Some things people need to discover for themselves." The older woman sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living someone else's life. Or maybe two lives at once." Madison sank down beside her. "I don't know how to be Victoria." Mrs. Collins patted her hand. "You don't have to be the 8-year-old girl who disappeared. You just have to be yourself, whoever that turns out to be." "Grace is coming tonight," Madison said, anxiety tightening her chest. "My mother, she never gave up hope, you know, even after Thomas did." Mrs. Collins adjusted her apron, a nervous gesture. "There's something else you should be prepared for, Mrs. Callahan. Olivia is quite upset. I overheard her on the phone earlier, speaking with her attorney." Madison tensed. "About me. About divorce proceedings, actually, and ensuring her children's inheritance is protected." Mrs. Collins lowered her voice. "She doesn't know about your true identity yet, but she's planning to force Thomas to choose between her and you." After Mrs. Collins left, Madison paced her room, the walls suddenly feeling confining. She needed air, space to think. Slipping out through the side entrance, she made her way to the jasmine garden, where the sweet scent filled the air like a forgotten memory. The twins found her there, escaping their tutor's supervision with the stealth of practiced conspirators. "Miss Madison," Emma called, running toward her with Noah close behind. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Madison smiled despite her inner turmoil. These children, her half-siblings, she realized with a jolt, had become precious to her over the past weeks. "Your tutor will be worried," she admonished gently. "He fell asleep reading Shakespeare," Noah explained, his stutter completely gone when speaking to her. "Super boring." Emma studied Madison's face with unusual seriousness. "Are you sad? Your eyes look sad?" Madison touched the girl's cheek, struck by the Callahan family resemblance she now recognized in both children. "Not sad, exactly. Just thinking about some big changes." "Are you leaving us?" Noah asked, alarm in his voice. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Madison answered honestly. "But no matter what, I'll always care about you both. That won't change." The sound of a car on the gravel driveway interrupted them. Madison glanced toward the house to see a taxi arriving. A woman stepped out, slender, elegant, with dark hair streaked with silver. Even at this distance, Madison recognized her from the photographs. Grace. Madison's heart began to race. You two should go back to your tutor before he notices you're gone. But Emma began to protest. Please, Madison insisted. This is important. Reluctantly, the twins headed back toward the house. Taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen, Madison remained frozen in the garden, watching as Thomas emerged to greet Grace, even from a distance. The tension in their body language was evident. Former spouses reunited by circumstances neither could have imagined. Grace looked toward the garden, and for a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Something passed between them. Recognition. Perhaps, or the ghost of a connection severed 18 years ago. Then Thomas guided Grace inside, his hand briefly touching her back in a gesture that spoke of their shared history. Madison should have followed, should have gone inside to face this woman who had given birth to her. Instead, she found herself moving in the opposite direction, toward the stone fountain at the far end of the property. The angels gazed down at her with their weathered faces as she sat on the fountain's edge, trailing her fingers through the cool water. Here, more than anywhere else on the estate, memories seemed closest to the surface. Not just fragments now, but fuller recollections. A birthday party with a princess theme. Her father teaching her to make stones skip across the water's surface. Her mother, Grace, wrapping her in a towel after she'd fallen in. Laughing despite her scolding words. Victoria! Madison looked up, startled. Grace stood a few feet away, her eyes filled with a desperate hope that made Madison's chest ache. I prefer Madison, she said softly, the words escaping before she could consider them. Grace nodded, making a visible effort to respect this boundary. Madison, then. May I join you? Madison gestured to the space beside her, and Grace sat down carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. Thomas showed me the DNA results, Grace said after a moment of silence. He explained about your amnesia, how you were found. Madison nodded, unable to meet the older woman's gaze. I don't remember much from before, just fragments, sensations. The doctor said that might be the case. Grace's voice was steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Memory is complicated, especially after trauma. I'm sorry, Madison said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. Not remembering, not being the daughter Grace had lost, not feeling the emotional connection that clearly overwhelmed the other woman. You have nothing to be sorry for, Grace assured her. You survived against all odds. You found your way back. That's a miracle I'd stopped believing was possible. They sat in silence, the splashing fountain filling the space between them. Madison felt Grace studying her profile, searching for the child she remembered in the woman before her. You have my mother's chin, Grace said suddenly. I used to see it in Victoria, in you, when you were little. My mother always said a strong chin meant a strong character. The personal detail, offered without expectation, somehow eased the tension between them. Madison found herself able to look directly at Grace for the first time. I have dreams about this fountain, she admitted. Even before I came here, I would dream about the angels. The sound of the water, Grace smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. You loved this fountain. You used to tell the most elaborate stories about the angels, how they came alive at night to protect the garden. Another memory surfaced, sitting on this same stone edge, weaving tales for her parents as twilight descended. I think I remember that, Madison said softly. Grace's hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to reach out but restrained herself. Whatever you remember or don't remember, whatever name you choose, you should know this. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. The simple declaration cut through Madison's defenses. This woman had spent 18 years mourning a child who wasn't dead, carrying hope long after others told her to move on. Whether Madison felt like Victoria or not, Grace was undeniably her mother, biologically and in every way that had mattered during those first 8 years of life. Before Madison could respond, Olivia's sharp voice cut through the garden air. So, it's true. Both women turned to see Olivia standing a few yards away, her perfect features contorted with anger and disbelief. Thomas just told me his ridiculous theory, Olivia continued, advancing toward them. that our nanny is actually his long-lost daughter. I thought he'd finally lost his mind, but here you are. Grace, playing along with this farce. Grace stood, instinctively positioning herself between Olivia and Madison. It's not a theory, Olivia. The DNA confirms it. DNA can be manipulated, Olivia snapped, especially when there's a multi-million-dollar inheritance at stake. Madison rose to her feet. I didn't know who I was when I came here. I'm still not sure I know. How convenient. Olivia's gaze was cutting. You worm your way into this household, charm the children, get close to Thomas, and suddenly, miracle of miracles, you turn out to be the long-lost Victoria. That's enough, Grace said firmly. Madison didn't orchestrate this. She was 8 years old when she was found with amnesia. Olivia laughed bitterly. And now, 18 years later, she just happens to apply for a job in this household. Please, this is the most transparent con I've ever seen. Before either Madison or Grace could respond, Noah and Emma appeared at the garden path, having clearly overheard the raised voices. Why are you yelling at Miss Madison? Emma demanded, her small face fierce with loyalty. Olivia's expression shifted instantly to maternal concern. Darlings, this is an adult conversation. Go back inside now. No, Noah said, moving to stand beside Madison. You're being mean. Thomas appeared behind the twins, his expression grave as he took in the tableau before him. I was going to suggest we all talk calmly inside, he said. But I see Olivia has decided on a more public approach. You've lost your mind, Thomas, Olivia said coldly, and I won't allow you to drag our children into this delusion. It's not a delusion, Thomas replied, his voice level. Madison is Victoria. The evidence is conclusive. Then she's your responsibility, Olivia declared. But Noah and Emma are coming with me now. She reached for the twins, who shrank back toward Madison. In their eyes, Madison saw confusion and fear. Their family was fracturing before them, and they didn't understand why. In that moment, looking at these children she'd grown to love, Madison made a decision. Whatever identity she ultimately claimed, Madison or Victoria or some integration of both, she wouldn't be the cause of more trauma for these innocent children. I should go, she said quietly. 4 voices protested simultaneously. Thomas, Grace, and both twins. Only Olivia looked triumphant. Just for tonight, Madison clarified, though her heart clenched at the thought of leaving, even temporarily. Everyone needs time to process this. As the sun set behind the mansion, casting long shadows across the garden, Madison felt caught between her 2 lives, the one she'd lived as Madison Hale, and the one she'd lost as Victoria Callahan. Somewhere between those identities, she would need to find herself anew. The night air carried the sweet scent of jasmine as Madison packed a small overnight bag. She wasn't running away. Not exactly, but she needed space to breathe, to think, to process the seismic shifts in her identity. Thomas had reluctantly agreed, arranging for her to stay at the guest house on the far edge of the property, close enough to remain connected but separate enough for reflection. A soft knock interrupted her packing. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. You don't have to leave, he said. This is your home. Is it? Madison zipped her bag. A week ago, I was Madison Hale, your children's nanny. Now I'm supposedly Victoria Callahan, your daughter from another marriage. That's a lot to absorb, for all of us. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. The twins are upset. They don't understand why you're going. What did you tell them? The truth, in simple terms, that you're my daughter, who was lost for a very long time, and now you need some quiet time to understand what that means. He hesitated. Noah asked if this means you're their sister now instead of their nanny. Despite everything, Madison smiled. What did you say? I said you're both. That family relationships can be complicated but always built on love. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Madison now recognized as hereditary. She did the same thing when anxious. Olivia has taken them to her sisters for the night, says they need stability, away from all this chaos. Madison's heart sank. I never meant to disrupt their lives. This isn't your fault. None of it is. Thomas's voice was firm. Olivia and I Our marriage has been struggling for years. This situation has simply brought those issues to the surface. Madison shouldered her bag, suddenly needing to be outside. I'll be at the guest house if anyone needs me. Thomas walked her through the quiet house and across the moonlit grounds. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was companionable rather than strained. At the guest house door, he paused. Grace would like to see you tomorrow, if you're willing. She has photos, stories, pieces of your early childhood that might help fill in the blanks. Madison nodded, throat tight. I'd like that. After Thomas left, Madison stood on the small porch, gazing back at the main house with its imposing silhouette against the night sky. Her eyes were drawn to a light in a third-floor window. Her old room, Victoria's room. Was it memory that pulled her attention there, or simply knowledge of what that room represented? Unable to sleep, Madison wandered outside again, drawn inexorably to the stone fountain. The angels watched with their weathered faces as she sat on the edge, listening to the gentle splash of water. I thought I'd find you here. Madison turned to see Grace approaching, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. Couldn't sleep either, Madison asked. Grace shook her head, sitting beside Madison with the same respectful distance she'd maintained earlier. Too many thoughts, too many years of imagining this moment, only to find reality is more complicated than any scenario I envisioned. I'm sorry I'm not. More like her, more like Victoria. You are her, Grace said gently. Just grown up, shaped by different experiences than the ones we would have given you. She gazed at the fountain. Besides, you still love this spot. Some things don't change. They sat in silence for a while, the water's murmur filling the space between them. Finally, Grace spoke again. Thomas told me you play the piano, that you performed Victoria's composition without ever having heard it before. Madison nodded, touching the locket at her throat. My hands remembered somehow, even when my mind didn't. Would you play for me? Grace asked softly. Not now, but tomorrow perhaps. That piece meant so much to me after you disappeared. I used to imagine you playing it somewhere, even when everyone told me you were gone forever. The vulnerability in Grace's request touched something deep in Madison. I'd like that. As the night deepened around them, Madison found herself sharing small fragments of her life, as Madison Hale, her foster parents' kindness, her work with children, her recurring dreams of this place. Grace listened without interruption, offering only understanding nods and, occasionally, tears that she wiped away quickly. In return, Grace shared stories of Victoria's early childhood, her precocious piano playing, her love of storytelling, her determination to do everything herself from the youngest age. Each anecdote was a thread connecting Madison to a past she couldn't fully remember, weaving Victoria into the fabric of her current identity. I think, Madison said slowly, that I don't have to choose between being Madison or Victoria. Maybe I can honor both, the child I was and the woman I've become. Grace reached out, tentatively covering Madison's hand with her own. This time, Madison didn't pull away. Whatever you decide, Grace said. I'm just grateful you're alive, that I get to see the remarkable woman my daughter grew into, even if I missed the journey that brought you here. Dawn was breaking as they walked back to the house together, a tentative bond forming between the woman who had lost a daughter and the daughter who had lost herself. Thomas was waiting on the terrace, coffee in hand, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept either. Behind him stood Olivia, her perfect appearance at odds with the early hour. The twins were nowhere to be seen. We need to talk, Olivia announced as they approached. All of us now. Inside Thomas's study, Olivia paced like a caged panther, while the others sat in uneasy silence. I've had my attorney review the situation, she began without preamble. The reappearance of Victoria, or Madison, whatever she's calling herself, changes things legally. Olivia, Thomas warned. No, let me finish. I'm not contesting the DNA results, Olivia continued briskly. I accept that Madison is Victoria. What I'm concerned about is the twins' future. Madison frowned. I don't understand. Their inheritance, their place in this family. Victoria was Thomas's sole heir before her disappearance. With her return, certain trusts and inheritance structures automatically revert to her. I don't care about money, Madison interjected. "This isn't just about money," Olivia countered. "It's about belonging. Noah and Emma adore you, but they're confused. Are you their nanny? Their sister? Both. How do we explain this to them in a way that doesn't make them feel supplanted?" For all her calculating demeanor, Olivia's concern for her children seemed genuine. Madison recognized that beneath the perfect facade was a mother fiercely protective of her children's emotional well-being. "I would never do anything to hurt Noah and Emma," Madison said firmly. "They're innocent in all this." "Then what do you want?" Olivia asked bluntly. "To be Victoria Callahan again? To take your place as Thomas's daughter and heir? Or to remain Madison Hale? Move on with your life, and let this family heal from reopening old wounds?" The question hung in the air, its implications weighty. Thomas started to object, but Madison raised a hand, stopping him. "What I want," she said slowly, "is to understand who I am. All of me. The 8 years I spent as Victoria, and the 18 years I lived as Madison. I don't want to choose between those identities or the relationships that come with them." She turned to Thomas and Grace. "I'd like to know my birth parents, to understand where I came from." Then to Olivia. "But I also care deeply about Noah and Emma. I want to be in their lives, however that looks." "And the inheritance," Olivia pressed. Madison shook her head. "Set up trusts for Noah and Emma. I don't need the Callahan fortune." Thomas cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "There's enough for all three of you. Always has been." Olivia's posture softened slightly. "And where will you live? What will you do? Remain as the twins' nanny while simultaneously being their half-sister? The society pages will have a field day with that arrangement." It was a fair point, one Madison hadn't fully considered in the whirlwind of revelations. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I think we all need to stop seeing this as a zero-sum game. My existence doesn't diminish Noah and Emma's place in this family." A small voice came from the doorway. "Are you really our sister?" All four adults turned to see the twins standing there, still in their pajamas, having clearly returned from their aunt's house earlier than expected. Madison knelt to their level. "Yes, I am. I didn't know it before, but it's true. I'm your father's daughter from long ago, before you were born." "But you're still our Miss Madison?" Emma asked, lower lip trembling. "Always," Madison promised. "No matter what name I use or where I live. I'll always be your Miss Madison, too." Noah approached cautiously. "Mom said you might go away, that you might take our place." Madison's eyes flicked to Olivia, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "No one could ever take your place," Madison told him firmly. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not really. Things might change a bit as we figure this out, but my love for you two won't change." The twins rushed forward then, wrapping their arms around Madison in fierce hugs that said more than words could convey. Over their heads, Madison met Olivia's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever their differences, the children's well-being would come first. Later that morning, Madison found herself in the music room, seated before the white grand piano. Grace sat nearby. Thomas stood by the window, and the twins perched on a small sofa, watching with wide, curious eyes. Even Olivia had joined them, standing in the doorway with arms crossed but expression neutral. Madison's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before beginning to play. The melody of Stars in the Garden filled the room, delicate yet assured, a child's composition performed with an adult's skill. As she played, memories flooded back, not in fragments now, but in waves. Birthdays and Christmases, bedtime stories and morning hugs. A childhood filled with love before it was brutally interrupted. She was Victoria, the beloved daughter whose disappearance had shattered 2 lives. She was Madison, the resilient young woman who had built a life from the ashes of trauma. Both identities were real, both valid, both essential parts of who she had become. As the final notes faded, Madison looked up to see tears streaming down Grace's face. Thomas stood with head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly. Even Olivia's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. "That was beautiful," Emma whispered, breaking the silence. Madison smiled through her own tears. "It's a piece of who I was," she said, "and now, a piece of who I am." Outside, the jasmine bloomed in the morning sun, its sweet scent carried on the breeze. The stone angels of the fountain stood silent sentinel as they had for generations, witnessing the healing of wounds, long thought permanent, within the walls of the Callahan mansion. A family fractured by tragedy began the delicate work of reconfiguring itself around a miracle none had dared hope for. The return of the lost child, not as the girl who had vanished, but as the woman she had become, Victoria Madison Callahan, finally and completely herself.